Good evening. That was our special guest Nokuthula Ngwenyama's exciting viola quintet called Primal Message from a 2018 performance at Chamber Music Northwest with Nokuthula Ngwenyama playing with the Dover Quartet. Thank you for joining us tonight for another musical conversation, our prelude to our next concert that premieres next Saturday evening. In a season of amazing performances that we've been presenting, this week's program by the Catalyst Quartet has a special relevance and importance amidst today's cultural and social reckoning in the United States. The Catalyst Quartet's program consists of works by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, Florence Price, and Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson, three of the most talented Black composers of the first half of the 20th century. It's critical that these works are heard, that they have passionate advocates, such as the Catalyst Quartet, and that these elicit all kinds of thoughts and questions within each of us that will someday lead us down a better path as a society. And another such advocate is our guest tonight, violist and composer Nokuthula Ngwenyama, otherwise known as Tula to those who've known her for a long time. She's very well known to Chamber Music Northwest. She's performed with us many times, has had multiple works commissioned by us, and there are still, very hopefully, some to come in the future. She's also a longtime personal friend of mine. It's hard to believe, but I think we met almost 30 years ago. Tula was a star performer as a violist. I didn't know her compositions yet at the time, but along the way our paths have intersected constantly in for many different reasons, and she's just one of the most beautiful, thoughtful, poetic speakers about music whom I know. She has tonight a really beautiful take on how musical styles have been integrated for a long time. And so Tula, I don't know if you are there. Can you hear me? If you can come on screen.
Yes,
There
I'm
you
here,
are.
Soovin. Thanks so much for that kind introduction. And I'm so happy to be here tonight with the Chamber Music Northwest family and with you. It's wonderful, artistic director, to talk about how we are already musically integrated.
So let me let you take the screen. I was about to say take the
All
stage,
right,
but take the
well, as
screen
I
from.
walk out onto stage, and as people will see the iPad as I walk out onto stage with my son, and so here we are with the beginning of the presentation. So good evening, everybody. So nice to be here. I wanted to talk about being musically integrated but socially catching up with Soovin and with all of you tonight. What's interesting is that um, these days, with the social reckoning that Soovin mentioned, I think a lot of us are asking about us as people. Have we evolved to embrace our similarities more than our differences? And I think that this is a very human question to ask, especially in times of turmoil and tribulation. And the wonderful thing is, I know that we have, especially as musicians and as music lovers, because music has and it continues to serve as a bridge to shared human expression. Um, it is an abstract language. It is not based on what we see. It is not based on geopolitical issues. It's based on the expression of itself. And to those who get to hear it or interact with it and enjoy it or get to play it. So, as I was saying, we are musically integrated before being socially integrated, although most of us are socially integrated most of the time. So, we can at least give ourselves a pat on the back for that. However, as music is a part of communication, it existed before we were human beings. Intonation in communication is ingrained in our prehistory, and musical expressions carry influences irrespective of geopolitical agenda. So I would venture to say that um, music as an expression is something that's prehistoric and that actually crosses the species. So I don't know if any of you have spoken with birds or we talk to our dogs, cats, fish, but there is something about some sort of expression and sharing, exchanging sound with other life forms as a way to communicate. And I think music definitely encompasses that. So this is kind of a big leap. So we're talking about music and how it ties us together in an abstract way. It doesn't have anything to do with our visual sense. It has everything to do with an abstract and heard sense. And so because of that, it leaves its traces in different musical traditions around the world. And I was fascinated about that, thinking about this idea of being musically integrated and taking an example of what we can think of as a very traditional Western classical music form and seeing that it has influences from, as I learned when I was in school with taking Western music, um, vernacular influences was usually when something would be adopted into Western music. Sometimes it was like, oh, it came from the vernacular. So the saraband would be one of these dances. So what is a saraband? I wish that we were live so that we could actually take audiences' responses, because I know that this is a learned audience. But so from the Oxford reference, sarabanda comes from the Spanish dance form in the 17th and 18th centuries, and I guess the uh, conservative point of view in terms of origin is that it originated in Latin America, appearing in Spain in the early 16th century. And it was a banned dance. It was banned by Philip II in 1583 because it was regarded as loose and ugly, exciting bad emotions. Um, but the ban did not stop it from being played and from it being popular. So it was introduced to France and England in the early 17th century, where a stately version in slow triple time, which is what we're used to hearing in the suites and sonatas and partitas of Bach, was preferred to the lively Spanish original. So we know that the Spanish original was a little bit faster. Sarabands became a standard movement of the suite and instrumental works by Purcell, J.S. Bach, and Handel, and in the 20th century it has been revived by Debussy, Satie, Vaughan Williams, in Job, and Britten in the Simple Symphony, amongst others, although it's an Oxford reference, so of course they're going to be a little bit weightier on the British. So, but that is not the whole story about the saraband, because as with historiography or or history in general, we're always digging for a deeper truth or maybe a more complete story. So again, we know the saraband as we think of it, for example, in the Bach suites, is a slower, formalized band dance in three, always in three, with emphasis placed on, and I know the audience would say it, the second beat, appears in stylized dance suites throughout Europe around the end in the 17th century, and its stated Latin American origins, are nebulous, as there were already heavy sub-Saharan presence, or there was already heavy sub-Saharan presence in the transatlantic trade in both Latin America and coming to Europe, which leads many scholars to assert, and this is the drum roll, and of course, I'm bringing Toyin Spellman Diaz from the Imani Winds to come up and say it's an African dance, but I actually found out about the African origins from Toyin, so I wanted to credit her here because this is how the exchange happens, this is how we learn, this is how we inform each other, and this is how we start to examine our own history in a different way and hopefully a more complete way. So when I heard Toyin say this, I thought, okay, I need to do a little bit more research on this because I didn't learn this in school, and I'd like to know more. So there are a couple professors right now at the University of Granada, Aurelia Martín Casares and Marga G. Barranco, who talk about within the setting of 16th century Spain. It's a really wonderful article, and I'll have a link to, or I have a hyperlink at the bottom of the next slide for people who are interested. But the frequency of Black African characters playing songs and dancing who appear in Golden Age Spanish comedies and short plays, as well as their mention in socio-historical sources, is astonishing. In the light of this, the lack of awareness of present-day Spaniards about the presence of Africans in Spanish history is remarkable, particularly as Spain was most probably and had the largest, or Spain most probably had the largest Black population in Renaissance Europe. And I actually saw that the largest slave population in the mid 1600s was in Spain on the Iberian Peninsula was sub-Saharan Africa. So already we know that there is a presence. And slavery, in the course of the research of all of this, slavery at this time and in the Spanish model was more of a kidnap and ransom temporary position in life. So people might get captured in a slave raid and sold, but could either earn their freedom or family members would pay a ransom for their freedom. And so it was considered a temporary state of being. So it was very different from what later happened with the chattel idea of slavery coming to the United States. So we're talking about a different type of interaction that sub-Saharan Africans would have had on the Iberian Peninsula at this time. And then continued in the same article. In contrast, two of the most popular Baroque dances, the Zarabanda and the Chacona, were also very popular among Black Africans. According to the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians from 1980, the Zarabanda originated during the 16th century in Latin America and Spain, and that's also what Oxford references. And from there, it spread to Italy, France, and Germany in the 17th century. The Chacona was originally a dance song, it seems, in Latin America and became popular in Spain early in the 17th century. Thus, we could perhaps consider a possible Black African origin or influence. And then Jose Luis Navarro, 1998, analyzes this possibility, or analyzes these possible Black African origins, analyzes these possible Black African origins in the same way as he has for other dances mentioned in various sources, such as the Paracumbe, Dengue, Maraguindoi, Kachumba, or Gayumbo. Their names are clearly reminiscent of West African dialects, and it is also clear that music and dance must have constituted a means of expression for Black Africans living in early modern Spain. So this is, I think, probably one of the more compelling arguments that there was some sort of musical exchange and that it came over in form, and then that form was adopted and continues to be used to this day, with, I think, more modern sarabands too. But if that's the case, and we actually consider that the saraband could have some sub-Saharan African influence, then we can actually see that this Western art music, classical music, that for whatever reason, I mean, for socio-geopolitical economic reasons, has been maybe thought of through one lens, having to do with the optics, literally. The music doesn't play the optic game in that way. Influences from one, from a dance or from a group of people will come and influence another group of people. We even think about the history of the violin. I'll just throw this in there. The violin originated from the North African Arabic. And so we know that, again, that is a North African influence into Europe, which actually brought about the modern violin that we use today. So there's a lot of exchange and influence. And so I think when we think about African influences in classical music, and then we put the optics back in, and then we think about people of color in classical music, it really shouldn't seem as exceptional as as uh, as it can seem, and nor should it actually seem that that influence would be original, because it's been happening for a while, that the music can accommodate these types of ideas and this type of exchange. It's just the society that deals with it based on the history. Um, so that's kind of what I want to, or I hope to, unpack a little bit tonight. Um, Other African influences in classical music, I'm sure, I mean, more recent than the saraband from the mid 1600s. Again, I wish that we could have more participation, Soovin, with the audience. Oh, there are questions, but um, spirituals, jazz, informed classical, as do bossa nova, salsa, hip hop. I think about Tanya Leon, wonderful Cuban composer, and how she has these incredible rhythms, polyrhythmic at times, and very Cuban and very West African influence in the rhythmic layering of her writing. And this is not even the only; these are not even the only things from Black music that come into classical and have over time. So this kind of exchange and integration, if you will, happens because the abstract of music allows it to happen. But yet, when we go to Wikipedia, and I just went there before coming to see you all tonight, we look at our jazz influenced composers. And we see some familiar names. I wish you could all shout them out. I mean, I'm sure people thought of Leonard Bernstein, Aaron Copland, George Gershwin, um, Dmitri Shostakovich, Igor Stravinsky, Gunther Schuller, Darius Milhaud. We can see this. I just grabbed that is the list on Wikipedia as of an hour ago. But why don't we see these three? So now we have to talk about, okay, what is it that keeps certain people from being recognized over other people when we're talking about African influences in classical music? That's a hard question. I don't have the full answer to that. I would actually, Soovin, I'd love to discuss it, and I would love for the audience to be able to chime in a bit.
Well, yes, that's the $1 million question. All right. And first of all, we should also say that I mean, I know from my perspective, it's not just these three composers or composers of certain races or of certain gender. I mean, it first is kind of an interesting philosophical discussion. Why is Johannes Brahms and Beethoven, and why are these, it's the so-called, I hate this word, but the canon, why have these become known as the canon? I mean, one reason is that they're just amazing music, but too often it's at the exclusion of so many other composers who are then therefore relegated to kind of second class status, right? Tula, can you stop your screen share maybe so that we can take over the screen here? Oh, you had more. You had more slides. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Tula.
Yes, I do have more, and I'd love to talk a little bit about the composers that the audience is going to hear tonight. Just because, as you can see, even I believe that an educated audience and a curious audience is an audience that's going to come back and is going to be able to interact with the musicians and with the composers and push music forward together. It's very collaborative, and I think that what's exciting about the time that we find ourselves in is that we can have conversations like this, and we can actually bring to light the composers that history, unfortunately, seems to favor forgetting over other composers. So it's important that I'm actually very encouraged that there's the interest to push forward. With Coleridge-Taylor, for example, he's been one of my favorite composers for a while, and in fact, I did an album called Ballade, um, and it was named after his ballade because I just was so taken by him, and I also felt certain similarities with him. So let's talk about him, and the work that you'll hear tonight is an early quartet that he wrote as a student. So it shows his talent, but it shows his youthful exuberance as well. Uh, uh, so Samuel Coleridge Taylor, as you see, he didn't live long, unfortunately. But his father was Creole from Sierra Leone, and he was raised by his mom and maternal grandfather in Croydon, Surrey. And he showed, and from everything that I've read, he was loved and given many opportunities as a child. He showed propensity towards music as a youngster and was encouraged by his musical uncle. I think he was a violinist. He did. Where did he study, Soovin? I think he studied in London, but
I'm
he ended
sorry.
up.
Yes, yeah, he was in London. I forgot which. There's so many
Was it
schools in
Royal
London. I
Academy?
forgot.
But I'm not sure. I have to look that up. But he did tour the United States, and he was dubbed in many of the newspapers as the African Mahler. He did multiple tours of the United States and had achieved quite a bit of celebrity in his life. And he married an English woman, and they had two children, Hiawatha and Avril Coleridge-Taylor, who both became musicians. So it was a musical family. He came from a musical family, and he passed that on to his children. And as I said, he died young of pneumonia, and I just think that was overwork. He had to raise a family. He had the economic strains and constraints trying to make a living as a musician, trying to make a living as a musician of color. Uh, I'm sure that was difficult, and it was a stressful situation for him. But he is celebrated and a beautiful composer. Um, I would say, would you call it neo-romantic or
Yeah, for
was
sure. Yeah,
yeah?
and when Mahler's name is evoked, it really it's with good reason for I think a lot of the sounds when you hear his orchestral works, his is it Song of Hiawatha, the cantata with choir and there it's really kind of a stunning sound that Mahler was definitely tapping into, sort of integrating the orchestra and the choir color as one. You know, like the second or third symphonies, for example, right off the bat. But maybe this is kind of a good departure point for my first question for you. And I realize I want everybody who's listening to realize that there are so many complicated perspectives to any of these questions regarding race and heritage, especially in an art form that is considered these days is not a in not a good way, very very white, having a very white history.
Well,
And
I think it's my father growing up in Los Angeles, born and raised in Los Angeles, um, and and adopted by an amazing family who just exposed me to all kinds of music and art. But I still had a relationship with my father, and so I would see him on the weekends, and he would ask me why I was playing that white man's music. Like, I'm 8, 9, something like that. And to me, I just loved music. I was exposed to it. I've loved music as for as long as I can remember. I heard Santa Monica Youth Symphony. My brother was a horn player. I got to hear Ida Levin in the section. Manuel Kempinski was conducting, a former principal second violinist with the NBC Symphony. And I was just around very dedicated and intense musicians uh, from a really young age. And so, even though I loved disco too, and I do remember wearing the bell bottoms and just rocking out to disco and running around, I also really loved the sound of the orchestra. And it took sitting in a room, front row, and hearing these amazing talents play to kind of knock me into my senses of how wondrous an instrument an orchestra really is. I mean, that's and obviously all of the components of the orchestra are amazing, and you know the violins were right there, and so I was just like, I want to play that, and so I never thought of music as what somebody looked like, right? Or where someone was from, but more just this incredible way to express all of the emotions and everything that we as human beings go through, live through.
Tula, what was do you remember some of your thoughts when your father asked you that when you were 8 or 9?
Oh, I no, I responded. I said it's music. I didn't know like music doesn't have a color to me. Music, I mean, okay, there are those the synesthetes who see color with music. Jonathan Holland is one. He literally you play a note and he sees color. So that's not what I mean. I didn't think. I said it's great music and I love it. That was I think my response. It's great music. I'm not thinking about it. I mean, I really I wasn't sitting there practicing Schraddick and Kreutzer, um, and well, fortunately though, my teachers were wonderful. Bonnie Bell, who's still teaching in Redlands, California, she's amazing. She started me. She started Cheryl Staples. She started a bunch of people from LA, and she gave me William Grant Still to work on. And I was exposed to Florence Price and Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson and other works by Althea Waits, who's a wonderful pianist in Los Angeles who taught at Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach for many years. So because I just thought it's great music. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't framing it in that way. And I think it's better not to frame it in that way. However, when we look at the way history remembers the contributions, that's where we have to start, scratching our heads and saying, we can't let this happen. We can't let it happen that the only stuff left in the, so-called canon, as you're saying, Soovin, are works by people who look a certain way only, because that's actually not representative of the contributions to the larger canon. But at the time, I just defended the music. I just defended music as a form of expression.
Mm-hmm. So was it your father's? What do you think he was implying that you should not play the white music and you should?
Well, I think it bothered him, given that he grew up in the bush in Rhodesia at the time, and where there were no roads out in the kind of like the reservation area that we would think of it as reservations in the United States. So um, he didn't go to first grade until he was 12 or 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up in a PhD program in history at UCLA. So he was really driven and smart, But it was, he started to like it. He started to support me when I was concertmaster of the CSUN Youth Symphony with Wes Kenny, who's now in Colorado. Um, and so conducting in Colorado. And he saw me come out and take a bow, as a concertmaster does, and tune the orchestra and sit down. And then we started playing, and he saw me as a leader. And once he saw me as a leader, it didn't matter what I was doing. He was like, "That's fine, just fine." Just lead. Whatever you're gonna do, just try to lead at it. And that was the kind of the green light for his support.
Well, he must have been, yeah, he must have been so proud, and I think there's hardly a parent in the world who would not come around at that point. But it is, I mean, it leads to yet another interesting question is that when I forgot what you said, did you say white man's music? Is that
Yeah,
how you
that's
put it?
exactly
Okay.
white man's music.
Okay.
Right.
That's good. That's important to, yeah, it's important to distinguish. It's not just white society, but white men. But it also sounds a little bit like there was actually just a lack, almost like a dislike. But actually, it turns out very possibly that it's not necessarily feeling about the music itself, but about the things that it represents.
Well, exactly. I think that it's, my father came to some concerts, but I don't think he was that comfortable in the setting. And even my relatives in Zimbabwe, when I played there, it's hard to convince them to even come into the hall where I'm playing, because it's somewhere that they're not used to going. And it feels, it kind of harkens back to this colonial era, and that's what, the colonizers liked. That's not our music or our identity. But on the other hand, it's fun when I do get my family to come into the concert hall and they get to be part of the experience, and they're feted and, by everybody, and that's, then they start to realize, oh, they like it then, but they wouldn't normally go to one of the concerts without me being there and saying, "You got to come." so so
Mm-hmm.
that's they, but yet they really honor and respect what I've done, and my calling to music, and they would support me 100%. I mean, they're very proud of that. So um, that's the divide, and kind of, I don't necessarily, well, I guess I do straddle both of those worlds, but I don't feel, I'm not going to be made to feel uncomfortable going to play, right? Or walking out on stage for anybody. I mean, if I have the opportunity to play for people, I would love to do that and to share that. And I feel like I, have a right to be there to play. So I that I don't think that feeling, you know, that's the feeling that I'm trying to break through with them. Like, they have the right to be there. This is their hall where they can hear music and they can see art and experience things that are relevant to their lives.
Mm-hmm. So let's try to talk about, I guess, more United States kind of perspective, because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even that is absurd. It's just so big, it's so broad, our country. But let's, as opposed to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, for you, with your heritage, and also just, I mean, the climate today, these days, after last summer, um, do you feel an obligation, in terms of your role as a performer and as a composer, for young black kids, do you feel like you recognize your importance, I guess, as a role model?
Oh, well, um,
And I'm asking you this, actually, it's kind of fascinating to ask you this because you're such a humble person. And I always am amazed at how unaware you are of how great you are and how much people admire you. So that's why I'm asking you this.
oh, well, thank you, Soovin. Well, I guess you know, as everyone who's a parent knows, that we have to be role models for our kids, and that kind of forces us to, rethink our actions and our decisions. So, um, I guess I feel that pressure, maybe, as a parent, to show my children, but also with the kids that I work with my students, with kids in the community in Phoenix, and that with the schools here, that it is important to come in, to show up, to be there, and to just share from the heart. I think about like Sonoran Storm for solo viola. I played one of the early performances for at a run out in West Phoenix that was arranged by Phoenix Chamber Music Society, and the Miro Quartet were playing, and David Schifrin was playing on that run out. And I mean, Sonoran Storm's like a good, 10 plus minutes, but I needed to run it down because I wanted to record it. And so I thought, okay, let's just, do it here. Um, it's really important to be able to share, as a role model, to be able to share, and stay open and just to keep giving. So I think that if I think of myself as a role model, then I have to, I want to be able to do that and also live up to, um, what my mentors have shown me. Uh, I think my composition mentors, my instrumental mentors, how they've lived their lives, and just try to kind of do the same. Is there a pressure right now? Yes, but in terms of, for example, with everything, with Black Lives Matter and Say Their Names, the George Floyd murder from last summer, which I know is still affecting a lot of us deeply, um, and we're in a pandemic. I just felt powerless, like so many people, to really voice, you know, heartbreak over where we're finding ourselves here socially. So it wasn't pressure, but it was literally a drive. It was the only way I could do to get it out. I just wrote Finding the Dream after, just as many of us, just tears of anguish and just frustration. Um, the words came first, and then the music came after that. And it's 8 minutes and 46 seconds because I think it's really important to think about the amount of time that, this person could have been saved. George Floyd would be alive, but somewhere between 0 minutes and 8 minutes and 46 seconds, nothing happened. What can happen in 8 minutes and 46 seconds? So I wanted to memorialize that amount of time. Um, so is there pressure? I think, well, yes and no, but I think it comes also from an internal emotional need to make a statement about this moment. I know of many artists and colleagues have, Anthony McGill, for instance, with the Taking a Knee, and Melissa White, and so many other, um, I would say, activists and musicians who really just put their heart out for us all to see, have taken a stand. And I wanted to take a stand, but I wanted to take a stand with, the pen is mightier than the sword, right? So I wanted to write my stand and then perform the stand. And then now Phoenix Boys Choir is a part of it. My kids are a part of it. We've done all of the recording and production and lockdown. And so I'm still working on it. I was working on it this afternoon. And so it's in the can and it's coming. But so, yes, there's pressure, but I think that good things are coming out of it. And I think that all artists, not just artists of color, but I think artists of color feel it, acutely. But I think many artists, irrespective of background, are feeling the same thing and feeling like, okay, when we come out of lockdown or when we're out of all of this, it better be a different world. It better be a better place. That's kind of how I think it motivates us, the pressure.
Mhm. I just had this thought. I'll share a story that puts my comment into
Yeah.
perspective, but I just thought only half jokingly that Tula, it's no pressure. You're only helping shape a generation.
Well,
But
that's,
don't.
you know what? That's every parent, though.
Yeah.
So every parent's under the same pressure. So, like that, we're all there. We're all
It
just making it
is.
through.
It is, but I also wondered, and again, I'm sure this conversation is to be continued in person. I'm sure for the two of us, but something I think about often is my not I mean not just often, kind of all the time, as um, as a programmer for Chamber Music Northwest, for example, and thinking about what to program, whom to program. As a performer, thinking about what I'm going to play. Also, very much as an educator with my students and talking to them about what repertoire am I going to encourage them to play. Um, I keep thinking about my upbringing, it was like in the we were just about the same age, late 70s. Um, and my first memories of music were just hearing records at home, and happened to be a lot of it happened to be violin music, even though my parents were not musicians, and they didn't really know a lot of in-depth information about classical music, but they just liked hearing it. But um, some of those early records were by a young Korean violinist named Kyunghwa Chung, and Kyunghwa Chung was, at the time, this is sort of same generation, she's just about the same age as Itzhak Perlman and Pinchas Zuckerman. And and she was really one of the few most famous violinists and greatest, most deserving violinists in the world at the time. Not only Asian, she was Korean, which was my parents' background, but not only Asian, I mean, there's hardly any Asian women who were, I mean, she was a woman, and there was just about
She
nobody.
was one of my mom's favorites, by the way. I heard a lot
Yeah,
of Kyung Wha Chung growing up, and then
yeah,
she would
yeah.
play often with Meili Meda and the AYS Symphony. So I
Oh.
would hear her there. Yeah, she's fabulous.
Well, she was, as my parents explained it at the time, they said she was Korea's biggest export at the time, in the like late 60s, around 1970, when her career was taking off. She came before Hyundai and Samsung and all these companies. She she was the biggest Korean hero, and so you can imagine, for a kid. I was born in the U.S. My parents immigrated for graduate studies, but that was actually, now that I think about it, that really was the single most famous Korean person that whose name was mentioned in our house more than the president of Korea. And so, and my it was kind of it wasn't I wasn't intended to become Kyunghwa Chung. That wasn't why I started the violin, but it was there in the air. It's not a coincidence that you have armies of amazing Korean violinists, who subsequently followed her. I mean, just like that, in one generation, it just happened, and it continues right to this day. And so I keep on remembering the importance of. Oh, I do remember also at the time, in the Chicago Symphony, because we were in the Chicago area, and there was one Korean woman in the violin section. I excuse me if anyone knows otherwise that I'm getting it wrong, but I do believe there was just one Korean woman there. And I mean, now it's kind of absurd, right? In the major American orchestras, you look up front, it's just so many Asian violinists of all backgrounds, and not just from Asia, but Asian American as well. So that is, I hope, I mean, that can be the power of a performer, magnetic performer, magnetic composer. And I hope that somebody like you is going to resonate with some young kids.
Well, I hope so. I know that, well, I've been in Los Angeles. There was a program that was run by Sylvia Kunin called the Musical Encounter Series, and uh, the people who were chosen to participate in the series would go to different public schools, inner city public schools in the LA Unified School District, and in fact still do. It's still a running program, and perform. And so I started doing that program when I was 10. And so I would play with the kids and afterwards out on the playground and so forth. And so I actually was able to play for kids that I later found out went into music very soon after like hearing the program.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward a few years, I'm a counselor at the Disney camp. There was Jung Ho Pak was conducting that year. Or yeah, he was one of the conductors. He's I think in Allentown now. So I was invited to be the viola section coach. So here I am, 17 years old. I'm about to go to Curtis. It's the summer before Curtis. I'm a coach for this Disney camp. And Priscilla Lee was there at the Disney camp.
Uh-huh.
And she was actually, I was her counselor. But so some of the kids, when we were doing the audition, and I said, well, where did you learn to play, or how long have you been playing? And one of the kids in that section said, I heard you play and I chose the viola and I'm playing. So it does happen fast. It does happen fast. And that is the power of sharing music, especially with kids. And as Dr. Zipper, my counterpoint teacher, along with Marianne Cummins and Warren Spaeth at Crossroads School, Dr. Zipper used to just, and I did musical encounters with him conducting J.C. Bach, and we'd go around the orchestra. It was a ton of fun. But he would say, gotta get people early, children like second grade and younger, while the walls are down, before we learn these systems, these systemic systems that separate and otherize us and don't allow the abstraction and of the expression of music to actually enter our beings. He was really, he really believed that. It's like the younger the better. And that's how you build an audience. More than any of this other stuff, it's through outreach.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have this program this week by the Catalyst Quartet, by these composers that you were speaking about, and by the way, we didn't ask them for this program. We just asked the Catalyst Quartet what they want to play, and it happened. They were so excited about this program. For our audience, by the way, they are releasing this week, just by coincidence, a CD, a digital release of a CD for now. I said CD and my phone heard Siri. A digital release of a CD of these works that they're playing. In addition to a piano quintet by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor with Stuart Goodyear, clarinet quintet with Anthony McGill. Really, really beautiful recording. So they offered this program. They were very excited to play it. That's what's amazing about the Catalyst Quartet is there's just such advocates. What the work they're doing, just passionately taking on underrepresented composers is so amazing. So regardless of the names of the composers, regardless of the race of the composers, it's just beautiful music and it's beautiful playing. But it is important to have them, right? There's Florence Price. It is really
Yes.
important, don't you think, to have a program like this?
Absolutely, and it's a credit to the Catalyst Quartet for programming these three wonderful composers that you will be hearing. We talked a little bit about Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. I'd love to just talk a little bit about Florence Price, she's a huge hero for me personally, along with Rebecca Clark. Um, and I mean, there are others, but I mean, she and Rebecca Clark as women, as leaders, as compositional titans, uh, they really resonate with me. Florence is, or Ms. Price, born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas, into a mixed race family, as well as Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. And we didn't talk about my other side being Japanese and the whole idea of Asians and presence of Asians in classical music too, which is different, which is has its own legacy, and to kind of feel a part of both. I personally feel a part of both. So it's wonderful actually to be a part of both. But she was born into a mixed race family, and she showed propensity towards music as a youngster and was encouraged by her mother, who was a music teacher. Her father was a dentist. Um, and she was encouraged to continue her piano and organ studies at New England Conservatory, but she could not enroll as a Black woman. So she said that she was from Pueblo, Mexico, and they accepted her um, as a Latina, or as Mexican, actually. But the fact that she had to lie about her background just to get an education just tells you about the time that, or tells us about the time that she was raised in, and how race impacted her daily life and impacted her opportunities. She did return to Arkansas, and she married Thomas Price, who was an attorney, and they had, I think, a couple children. I'm not sure if it was two or more, but I believe it's two. But moved north to Chicago as part of the Great Migration, just because Jim Crow and lynchings were terrorizing people in the South. So she did move to Chicago, and she had a successful career performing her own works, performing her piano concertos. She's the first African American woman to have a symphony performed by a major orchestra. And she also taught. Um, Margaret Bonds was her most well known student. So she left a legacy, but for some reason, again, much of her stuff has been overlooked until now. So, and in fact, some scores of hers were just found in a home in Arkansas that she thought that she had lost. So that will be coming out soon. I know a lot of people are excited about getting their hands on that music. And then there will be a piece by Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson, who was actually named after Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. I think he's from North Carolina, but he ended up going to high school in New York City, and he worked throughout many different genres. In jazz, with R&B, he worked with Marvin Gaye. He did multiple scores, very much in Black popular music, but also very much in classical music. And from what I remember about his writing, I think that I think it definitely goes more towards avant garde. It's very free. It doesn't always have to be free, but I like the way that he pushes boundaries, and very strong, strong style. Um, Sanford Allen is known for recording his works amongst other prominent musicians, but I I think that with these three composers, the audience will hear three different beautiful styles that are also very much informed by their personal experiences, and also by the African elements that they bring into their music to frame with their personal experiences. So I don't know, Soovin, if you wanted to add anything else about the program per se.
Well, no, just a couple of comments on what you said. By the way, I just want to remind our audience, please feel free to, it's been a very shy, quiet audience tonight. Please feel free to write in any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But you mentioned Sanford Allen, violinist in the New York Philharmonic. Was he the first black member of the New York Philharmonic?
Yes.
Also, okay, and horribly, until Anthony McGill joined, I don't know, not Anthony probably joined 5 years ago or something. I think Anthony was the second. Is that right?
Second or third?
Yeah.
Maybe Sanford was the second. I'm not
Okay.
sure, but it's very in terms of that type of integration. It's been slower in New York than in other places.
Hmm. But he was. I did see a video once of him playing one of Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson's blues solo pieces. It was
Yeah.
amazing. It
Yeah.
was amazing. It was just the way it just oozed out of him. You know, the style. You know, it was really just so inspiring. Um, but you know, you mentioned Florence Price and Rebecca Clark, and you talked about how inspiring they were for you,
Hmm.
how important they were for you. So that right there shows you what is important about getting certain people out in front of the public, out in front of kids,
Hmm.
to really to do exactly that, to show what's possible.
And also to inspire us musicians who, we each have our artistic journeys. And the amazing thing, I guess, about this period is that I think it gives us all a little bit more time to study different scores, think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, look at, study our mentors too, their behavior, their actions. Like, what did they do when they faced this issue, or what did they do when they couldn't do something, or there was this adversity? How did they overcome? And so that's Rebecca Clark, when she finally married in her 40s. It was like around World War II, when she had come back to the United States from her native England. Um, she didn't write anything after she got married, and she just said it was too much. There was always too much to do, that she could never come back to the score. And when I read that, I mean, it's tragic, I think. I read that and I thought, okay, um, I love Rebecca Clark. I love pretty much everything she's written. She's a violist too, so that's like amazing. She hears those inner voices, she feels that. And there's something about writing from the inside of the ensemble that's really satisfying um, in terms of working with the voices and the texture of the sound. Um, but here we are, we have access to Sibelius and faster writing programs and things like that. Um, what can I do to not, to not stop writing, right? So there's a lot we can learn from our mentors too. Like, I look at Florence Price and how her creative output, and how she gave and she gave and she gave to her students, she gave to her family, she gave to the repertoire, um, to the corpus of the repertoire. But and she pushed through so much adversity, and yet Rebecca Clark didn't. So I like looking at the whys there because I can learn from them. We can all learn from them.
So the back to the Catalyst Quartet's program,
Yes.
though. I'm also curious. This also is a question for you as a woman as well. And we did have we had this Chamber Music Northwest festival, women composers, a few years ago, a few summers ago. So the Catalyst Quartet program is really clearly it's just a celebration of these three very important dead composers, though they are dead composers, and we have been as an industry, I think, doing a lot of due diligence about trying to rediscover composers that history has, for some reason or another, has covered them up, and their music is not part of our consciousness. And so we are finding, thankfully, quite a trove of really wonderful music by Black composers. However, they were really probably in. We have no data that says this, but I would dare to say that coming out of the top music conservatories, let's say these days, there are some really amazing young Black composers. And let's say two favorites. So I'm calling you still a young composer. Two Chamber Music Northwest favorite examples are you and Valerie Coleman. Who are really helping to shape the industry. But is it no? You were talking about musical integration. I also know that you love that idea of integration and collaboration in general. Is it more effective or less effective to be having an all female composer program, an all Black composer program?
Well, that's an interesting question because when we otherize instead of include, it can divide us and almost set up a paradigm for, okay, well, these works could only get played because they were played on an all women's concert, for example, or an all BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color concert, etc. And I'd like to see more integration. I don't see how playing Mozart, like my son, he's like, I can't bag on Mozart. Mozart's great. Like, how does somebody, just because he's a guy and, and he's Austrian, he's great. It doesn't matter where he was born or who, he's just wonderful. And so there are great composers that we cannot forget. But there are other great composers that we also cannot forget. So that is, I think that separating it instead of integrating it can cause issues.
Okay, so
Um,
you like the integration program in terms of
well,
programming.
I think the celebration is important. Like right now, it's Black History Month, and I think it's important to think about that when presenters are programming, because again, it's a way to invite these kinds of conversations and to share with the audience the research and the learning that we do around our art form, and actually hopefully get them more excited about it. And I just answered a question about Coleridge-Taylor and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor being named after the poet, and that Coleridge-Taylor's writings actually influenced Samuel Coleridge-Taylor quite a bit. He's a very romantic figure all the way around. But I think that the more that we normalize the discourse and say, okay, we really have been musically integrated, it's just that socially and historically we haven't been able to recognize it as much. So now is the time to recognize it and just and then just celebrate the talent across the board while continuing to do our history and historiography digging to have a more complete picture about the influences in what we're doing and what we're playing. So, but on the other hand, I love like being a part of Umama Wo Mama with Hannah Lash and Valerie Coleman Page. We're all women, we're composers, but it's it's there is, and we're all mothers, so that brings us together in a way, just our shared experience, like we're all in the score together, we're all raising families, and we're bringing that experience. I think it's powerful. So I don't feel otherized by our own group. I feel just like it's what an incredible treat and opportunity to get to share with these two women who are great creative forces in their own right and wonderful people. And so, it's hard to say, should we feature, should we not feature in this way? I think it's more important that things are getting featured no matter how.
For our audience, Umama Wumama is a work that has been unfortunately delayed. Its premiere was supposed to be done this past summer. It's a three-way work by Nokuthula and Valerie Coleman and Hannah Lash. And then we were going to try to do it this coming summer. We will do it next summer in 2022.
Looking forward to that.
Come hell or high water, we will do it. We have some really good questions that are starting to come in. Carl Abba was asking about the commission about Umama Wumama. And just one more thing for those of you who don't know Hannah and Tula and Valerie, they're a viola, harp, and flute trio. And there have been some really, really beautiful works. Very, very potent instrumental combination. And other than that, I don't know more about the piece yet, so maybe Tula's typing something. We have one question that's kind of just fascinating. I never thought about it. I don't have an answer for it, but do you hear racism informing the Black composer's music when you play it?
I'm gonna think about when I was on a panel with Joan Tower and she talked about screening scores for the NEA for some award. And she and the entire jury could not tell whether or not the person who wrote the music was a man or a woman or what they looked like, actually. So I don't know. I guess racism sounds like not hearing the complete works of people being played in the concert hall and people being left out of the history books. That's what racism sounds like. If that's a sound, it's a lack of sound. So that's a hard question, but I know that the experiences, like I know Florence Price's experiences informed the way that she wrote, and she wrote such heartfelt melodies celebrating her heritage. And I think that maybe the pain that comes through some of those melodies could be in reference to the experiences that a composer might have because of their race. But as the Buddha says, suffering is universal.
Yeah. Another question, which we kind of touched upon, but how do you propose bringing BIPOC composers to the fore in an integrated way? And one is certainly just by programming it, and
Right.
bringing it to people's attention, I have a feeling Tula would agree with me, focusing on younger people, and let's say I take very seriously my role in teaching top conservatory students at the New England Conservatory. By the way, Florence Price, you were talking about her going to New England Conservatory. This is a sign of, I guess, small progress, although it's sad that it's over 100 years later. But if you are a young musician of color auditioning for the New England Conservatory today, better believe that you are getting very, very special attention to see if there are barriers that will get in the way of you coming to New England Conservatory, and to see, it's not necessarily that we can do something about it, but we're certainly going to examine it. So gone are the days where you have to say you are not half black and you're Mexican, but it's something I think that we're very proud to take very, very seriously, that we want to. There are barriers, there are societal barriers, certainly financial barriers. We really are taking that very seriously. But
it's a question about access, and I think that people, there are, especially going through these times, I think it's great that you're reaching out and talking to young students who might be listening. It should never, if music is your passion and it is the only thing that you feel that is the right thing for you to do, there should be no barrier to go into music. And I think now is an exciting time that most conservatories are encouraging diversity, because I think everyone's kind of taking a look and just saying, we can't let this continue like this. So I think that it's encouraging times for people. And I think that when the systems open up in this way, then we can change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, just to get back to the question of bringing underrepresented composers, and so one way in my role at the New England Conservatory that I think I really kind of treasure is through young performers who are going to populate our whole industry very soon, as soon as they leave school, and so it on another level, it's getting to them young and making sure they understand that this music is going to become part of the canon. So we for the violin auditions, for instance, this year, we didn't state it as a requirement that you have to play a work by a composer of color, but we implied that it would be very, in the language, that it would be very, you're very welcome to. And it's so heartening to, as we're seeing these audition videos, one student after another who has discovered composers they probably might not have otherwise. And we also asked them to speak in their videos a little bit about why they chose it. It's really wonderful to see, when you're talking about hundreds of young players, and when that continues year after year, that's how repertoire kind of seeps into our collective conscience. There's and we, Tula, we could probably talk all night, my gosh, but there's a really,
yeah, I was just summing up kind of what you were saying and typing it out for the answered question, but as you were saying it, it reminded me of something. Oh, well, one of the competitions that I used to run, actually, this year, actually the only competition I have ever run, has a list of BIPOC composers that it asks the competitors to choose from. And this is an international competition. So I think people our administrators are taking this very seriously and want the change. And we've known about this for a while. I mean, when I did the CD of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, I knew about his music for a while, but and almost couldn't understand why other people didn't know about him. But people, Althea Waits, Catalyst Quartet, Imani Wins. I mean, so many groups, so many people have been championing BIPOC composers, but it was kind of on the outside of where people were thinking. And now all of a sudden it's like front row center, and it's like, oh, we want to kind of get on this bandwagon. So I think people are kind of jumping on with a lot of gusto and enthusiasm, I might add, which is why it's exciting, and that's why we can talk about it for a long time, because I've been excited about this basically my entire career in classical music, to try to play repertoire that has these African influences. Even we talked about Frederick Delius, who was Duke Ellington's favorite composer, English composer who credits the black music that he heard when he was working on a plantation in Florida for his musical melodic, much of his melodic language. That these influences have been there. So I think if we just keep celebrating them and showing that they're there and informing the public that they're there, and then celebrating these different composers, I think that's a good start.
The last question that we'll go out with, and it's a big question. Thankfully, my wife Gloria and I are just beginning as co-artistic directors, so it's a question that we can address for some time to come. What ideas do you have to bring more young people, and especially young people of color, to Chamber Music Northwest concerts in the future? And again, as Tula was starting to say, it's our first answer would be to really try to reach kids as early as possible. It seems like in Portland, there's a lot of really wonderful work already going on. It can never be enough, and Chambers in Northwest has been looking for ways in which we can really consolidate the musical community in Portland to reach younger people in an even more powerful way. Unfortunately, as we were really starting to ramp up our excitement and plans, then we had a pandemic, so which has really made it very difficult. I mean, not just to reach kids with music, but in any way. But hopefully, this period is the end is on the horizon, and I hope next school year that we'll be able to start doing some really exciting things. We can't just, for many societal, cultural reasons, people aren't just going to automatically start coming to concerts. It has to be a kind of a long range commitment by our organization, by a community, by our classical music industry, to really engage younger people over many, many years. And then to remove some of the barriers, again, the barriers that we can remove. Let's say if it's simple as buying a ticket for a young person or a family that can't otherwise, they if they would like to come, but it's that they can't buy a ticket, well, then we have to, that's maybe the easiest thing that we will all remedy one way or another. But it does go beyond that. There's a kind of a fear of going to concerts for people who have never been, a feeling of exclusion, a feeling of not understanding, and then there's just simply lack of appreciation. That's a big issue too. It's not that everybody
Learning to listen is a big one, especially in the day where we have our devices and the attention span is so much shorter for these kids. than it was for us.
Mm-hmm.
I thank our lucky stars we did not grow up with cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's liberation when I you know it's liberation because these kids are on it all the time, and the attention span ends up kind of getting programmed into these little spurts. So to sit down and listen to even the movement of a Schubert symphony is hard for it doesn't capture, and especially now that we're in COVID and it's not live, the recording doesn't move the air in the same way an ensemble or an orchestra does. So, but on the bright side, I actually think that once we're through this, and I hope that everybody stays well and healthy through all of this, um, I think that people will be rearing to go out and rearing to have social experiences, and this is a way that they can have social experiences. Something that quickly that Phoenix Chamber Music Society does is we have a Dick Whitney scholarship named after our past president, and he started a scholarship fund that partnered with the educational um, committee that would work with teachers in different schools in the valley to recognize certain students in their classes and give them the scholarship to come bring their parents, family members to a concert, receive a scholarship with a small scholarship with no strings attached, use it for whatever you want, and come, and then they would fill out a questionnaire. What did you think of the program? What did you know? And that scholarship program has been really successful in bringing families to the hall to hear great concerts and to celebrating the children's successes. They are from music classes, so in their music classes. So I that is something that might be worth considering, and it's actually one of the most beloved things that Phoenix Chamber Music Society does. And in addition to that, they are introduced before the concert even starts, and these kids stand up, and we would like to welcome the Whitney scholars, and they stand up, and the entire audience welcomes them, and they're so thrilled to have them and their families there. So I think that it is possible to do it.
Mm-hmm. Tula, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Um, this is part of the answer also to the last question about bringing more young people of color to concerts is to have this conversation again and again and again, and for us all to just think about these questions.
Keeping the door open is really important. And that's something that we keep somebody held the door open for us so that we could have this conversation.
Right.
Our mentors, uh, everyone we've worked with along the way. And so now we keep that door open for people and let them in to the conversation, bring them on stage, make music together, and we help each other. And that's how music stays alive.
So, just to remind our audience of this Saturday's premiere of the Catalyst Quartet performance, I think it'll be special on many levels that you're going to enjoy it. I also want to remind you to read the program notes, really, really excellent program notes by our guest writer, Frederick Noonan, who is really the most beautiful writer of notes I've ever come across. And I learned so much. So I encourage you to go to our website and to read those. Tula, can't wait to have you back in Portland. Can't wait to give you a hug and make music again together before too long. It'll happen. So
Likewise, likewise. Thanks so much. It's been great
okay,
spending this evening with all of you.
take care. Good night.
Take care. Bye.